Now, we already know that the room Jamin Davis is playing in as a linebacker for the Washington Commanders looks a lot different than it did last season. But the role that Jamin Davis plays within this defense could look just as different in 2024. That and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, and I am your host, David Harrison, credentialed member of the media, covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com, a part of Sports Illustrated, here with you every Monday through Friday, and I greatly appreciate you for coming through today. Everydayers, I greatly appreciate you coming through every day. On today's episode, we are going to discuss the tight end position, talk a little bit about a position group that we haven't discussed a lot so far this offseason. We're going to talk about the offensive line under new O-line coach Bobby Johnson. We're going to hit some OTA practice number 2 quotes about the offense in general, but we're actually going to start a very offensive-focused episode talking about the defense and specifically linebacker Jamin Davis. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. If you want to discuss this episode or anything else Washington Commanders related, got a question that you need an answer to, or just want to have a conversation, you can text me directly by going to joinsubtext.com/lockedoncommanders today and become a Locked On Commanders insider. From there, you will get messages, content, analysis, and more delivered straight from me to you, to your phone. No downloads, no hashtags, no filters required. It's just a simple text message. You text me back, we have a conversation. That's how it works. Again, become a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/lockedoncommanders today. Jamin Davis is going to be playing in a whole different looking linebacker room in 2024, but it turns out he could also be playing a whole different type of position. Jamin Davis playing on the edge is absolutely a thing that could happen in 2024 and a thing that the Washington Commanders have already kind of been preparing for. And honestly, the groundwork for this whole thing goes back to the offseason. And we actually had this conversation shortly before the NFL Scouting Combine, and it's something that Dan Quinn talked about at the NFL Scouting Combine. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that too. But most recently, one of my insiders was telling me that John Keim, ESPN beat reporter covering the Washington Commanders here every day, along with everybody else, was talking about seeing Jamin Davis doing some edge drills. And I'll tell you right now, we've discussed this every day, or as you've heard me say this every single time we go out to practice, there is a lot going on. O-linemen are working in one place, running backs, tight ends are working, receivers are working, quarterbacks, DBs, linebackers, D linemen, they're all working out at the same time. A lot of times they're in separate groups. Sometimes they join forces like combo blocks with tackles and tight ends, things like that, running backs getting out there doing some flat work, receivers running routes and all that stuff for quarterbacks. Certainly, sometimes they work together. But the bottom line is, unless you got like 9 people out there and 9 sets of eyes, you're not going to see everything. So personally, I have not witnessed Jamin Davis working on the edge with the Washington Commanders coaches, but I have been very, very focused on the new blood coming into this team so far through 2 OTA practices. So not something I've seen physically, but John Keim of ESPN, if he says he's seeing Jamin Davis do edge work, Jamin Davis is doing edge work. And it's not really surprising because that is a skill set of Jamin Davis's that has stuck out since he joined the NFL. Since joining the NFL, Jamin Davis's pass rushing ability has stood out not only on tape, but also to grading services like Pro Football Focus. So in his rookie season, Jamin Davis's pass rush grade was the highest grade he got from PFF in his rookie year. Second year, it was the second highest grade he had behind tackling. Pass rushing, tackling, they kind of go hand in hand together, right? Third highest, or in his third season, his pass rush grade was his third highest grade behind tackling and run defense. So what does all of this say, right? Like stat scouting is very, very dangerous. So you don't want to just do stat scouting. But when we watch Jamin Davis on the field and we watch the tape, and we watch the games, and we watch the practices, and we look at the stat box and the grades here from PFF, and we realize that these things line up, what all of it is telling you is that Jamin Davis is more effective inside the box. You want Jamin Davis lined up no more than 5-6 yards off the line of scrimmage, and you want him moving forward. You want him playing downhill. You want him rushing the quarterback. You want him run fitting. You want him doing all those kinds of things. He is not a pass coverage tight end. At least he hasn't been so far in his NFL career. And 3 years in, I'm not saying he can't learn something new, all those things, but I will tell you, it's kind of a mixed bag. Usually guys are kind of what they are at this point in time. 2023, the top pass rushing reps by a linebacker in the NFL belonged to Devin White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, now of the Philadelphia Eagles. But Devin White had 148 pass rushing reps. Something I can tell you from watching the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Devin White throughout the entirety of his career specifically, Devin White is another one of those linebackers whose pass coverage ability never really developed. Run stopper, he's always been that. Pass rusher, he's always been that. The good thing for Devin White and why his stock took off so much as it did early in his career is he had a defensive coordinator and then a head coach in Todd Bowles who knew how to emphasize that and emphasized it, allowed Devin White to play within his strengths. Jamin Davis, however, played in a defensive scheme and style that asked him to do a lot of pass coverage work and not as much pass rushing, not as much run defense, or at least being a primary attacking run defender, right? Because in 2023, while Devin White was rushing the passer 148 times, Jamin Davis was doing it 61 times. That ranked 36th in the NFL. So think about it, he's not even top 32 in pass rushes, but this is a guy that as a linebacker is one of the best pass rushers by grade in the National Football League, according to PFF. Meanwhile, he's playing 385 coverage snaps, which only ranks 49th in the league, 109th ranked coverage linebacker by grade, according to PFF. So the coaching staff can't do anything about how many times the team throws, right? If you're a linebacker and you're not blitzing and they pass, you're in pass coverage. Like bottom line, that's the only option you have there. What they can determine, though, is whether or not you turn a guy into a rusher. And then we go back and reinforce kind of everything we've been talking about. 296 run defense snaps Jamin Davis was in on last year, ranked 49th. He was 29th in run defense grade. So again, just showing you that box safety ability. 71st in depth of tackle, 42nd in tackles for loss. So again, you got a linebacker here who's really good at getting to the quarterback, really good at winning his pass rush sets, really good at stopping runs, really good at tackling. But he's 71st in depth of tackle. He's 42nd in tackles for loss. What does that tell you? That tells you, and well, I don't want to say that tells you because the tape tells you, but what those stats reinforce is that Jamin Davis was asked to play off the line. He's asked to play middle of the field, intermediate part. React to the pass first before you react to the run. So by the time he's getting to the ball, if there's a tackle for loss opportunity, it's usually going to a D end or maybe a crashing safety, something like that. But we need Jamin Davis to be that crasher, and that is what part of this is about. Now, again, we're in the second OTA practice that the media has seen. We'll see our third, not this week, but next week. So, don't take it as a locked in. This is exactly what Jamin Davis is going to be doing. But this idea did not just get born here in the month of May. Back in February at the NFL Scouting Combine, Dan Quinn was asked about some of the players that he had been studying on film because, again, he hadn't met the players, at least on the field, up to that point, and the tape that he'd been watching. And he said specifically about Jamin Davis, quote, "When I looked at the roster, I wanted to find every single thing that could happen. So I went through the last few years of every blitz he was taking, talking about Jamin Davis specifically, and where do I see bursts? Where do I see traits? And so all I can do is evaluate on that. And then you find ways to train them and feature them into that space. Sometimes when you're a linebacker, it's hard to find how to do the drill work as a D lineman to work games to do that. So finding that right balance. So I have not had that discussion with him yet and what that looked like. I just want to see traits of blitzing and being aggressive and going forward. And I'm looking for anything that would show those kinds of pass rush traits along the roster, outside, inside the whole thing." End quote. So Dan Quinn there at the NFL Scouting Combine, right? So by this time, again, he's only getting to know his players by watching their tape, right? He's obviously played against some of them, all that stuff, but really he's just getting to watch their tape. He's got his assistant coaches, his position coaches, watching tape, trying to figure it out. But early on, they keyed in on, we need to watch Jamin Davis's blitz tape. And I will tell you right now, it's not very often, right? There's not a whole lot of blitzes. You talked about this pass rush rate, right? Was 36th in the NFL. So only 61 reps. So think about an entire 18-week, 17-game NFL regular season. You only got 61 blitzes, pass rushes to watch. It's not a whole lot of them, but you could tell the coach staff already saw that potential in him. It's something that we've all talked about as we cover Jamin Davis. And it's something that, again, since February, we've been talking about this possibility. So it looks like the Washington Commanders are following through with that potential, following through, trying to see where Jamin Davis can come in, because the bottom line is by the time 2025 rolls around, Jamin Davis may not be a part of this team anymore after the team decided to decline his fifth-year option. So that's how we start off this conversation. The rest of this episode is going to be very offensive, folks. We've done a lot of talking about defense, leaders on the defense, what's happening with guys like Emmanuel Forbes, stuff like that. And really, you see this Emmanuel Forbes, Jamin Davis thing, both first-round picks. This coaching staff doesn't want to just throw away these first-round pick guys. They want to come in and find out, even though we didn't pick them, let's see where we can move them around. So that's where you see Emmanuel Forbes getting some punt return opportunities, some kick return opportunities, Jamin Davis getting some edge opportunities. Let's see where these guys can thrive with our style of play, see if we can't salvage them, even though the previous regime obviously kind of flamed out in a pretty bad way. But let's move over to the offensive side of things. We're going to talk about some quotes from OTA practice number 2, open to the media. We're also going to talk about the tight ends, O-line coach Bobby Johnson, specifically. All that next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers, you can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. My $100 bet on the Minnesota Timberwolves to win it all after beating the Denver Nuggets is not looking all that strong right now. But if you think I'm still good to go, then you can get in on it with me at plus 1,200 odds now that the Timberwolves have fallen back 0-2, playing game 3 Sunday night. Maybe as you're watching this, it could be already over by the time you see or hear this, depending on what time you catch this. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listener, your first view today and every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming through on a regular basis every day like you do. Make sure you come back tomorrow. We'll talk more about what's going on around the Washington Commanders, including the potential that the NFL draft could be hosted by Washington, D.C. as early as 2027. Before we get to that episode, in the meantime, if you're looking to fill your sports conversation, check out Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So on Friday, we wrapped up last week following OTA practice with some quotes about mostly defensive players and a lot about leadership, right? And that's, just kind of part of the way that the flow of the team is going. There's a lot of leaders on the defensive side of the ball coming in here, but there's also some leaders on the offensive side of things. And it starts in the coaching staff, right? Coach Dan Quinn is coming in. He's going to be a leader on both sides of the ball, being the head coach, but also Kliff Kingsbury. And I wanted to start with these quotes about the offense, really kind of talking about the process, what the process is the Washington Commanders are going through here in the OTA period. So Coach Quinn was asked about how they're conducting OTAs, what was on the schedule, and kind of how these guys go about their business. And Coach Quinn had this to say, quote, "In the early part of the day, meetings and workouts. In the strength and conditioning side, different things on different days. And then we do a portion inside where we work a lot of team and go through blitzes and run game. And then outside, we really work, like there's a long piece on our skill development. And so as you're going through, that's what it is this time of year, is about skills and skills. And if you keep working those skills hard, then you'll be able to trust those skills when you put it into these certain plays and these certain things. Offensively, there's a certain route that may go in. This is the extreme detail for that route, the movement. And that's how you keep working the skills, and then you put it into the whole play," end quote. So what I really liked about what Dan Quinn just kind of said in there is really kind of how they break it down, right? Obviously, you've got the meetings and you've got workouts, strength and conditioning. The strength and conditioning staff kind of has things for each guy to do, whether working on conditioning or working on strength, which body part, all that stuff. But then you go inside, and that's where they get through talking and walking through some blitzes, through some of their run game. Because right now in this part of the offseason, this is where I don't want to say things get frustrating, but like as a person who's expected to analyze this team, right? Like I've got insiders, especially, but I've got people on Twitter, I've got YouTube commenters asking me like, hey, how does Frankie Louvu look as a blitzer? And then, hey, how does Brian Robinson look this year? Hey, how does Austin Eckler look so far this year? And it's really hard to answer those questions because there's no pads, there's no hitting. And we're talking about roles that hinge on a lot of pads and a lot of hitting, right? Like Brian Robinson, how well can he find the hole? But right now, there's no holes for him to find. How well is he taken? How well can he take on a defender when he gets in the A gap and there's a linebacker standing there? Right now, there is no A gap. Right now, there's no defender standing there. And right now, there's no Brian Robinson taking on the defender, right? So on and so forth. I haven't seen Frankie Louvu blitz a quarterback because they're not blitzing right now. So to know that the team is still actually going through there and working on these things is important. But then you talk about offensively, right? And we talk about all these guys working in unison. We've kind of talked about this in previous episodes as well. Everydayers, you'll remember that. But understanding the minutia of what it is that you're trying to do, understanding the details that go into what you're trying to do, so that when it comes time to put the whole package together, and this thing is like a dance, right? We talk about the offensive line kind of being in rhythm, being in step with each other, but the whole thing is kind of a dance, right? So we can go through, all right, Jahan, on this certain play, you're lined up right side, wide split, so you're outside the numbers, and your job is to come off with an inside release. You're going to hit a stutter step outside or whatever kind of step we're going to take, get the defender moving outside or use that leverage to pin him outside. Boom, you're going to cut up field, 45-degree angle, get up the field. That's your route. That's how we're going to run this thing. Fantastic. How do you do that against press? How do you do that against press with a long defender? How do you do it in press against a short defender? How do you do it in press or an off coverage? Same thing, right? Go through those dance steps because they're different. When you run this specific route, whatever the route is, against off coverage, long defender, you got to run it differently than if you're running it in press coverage and a short defender. You just do it. It changes the steps. So going through all those things, very, very important right now. So you like hearing that, even though we're not in the mode where we can put a hit on somebody, where we can put these pads on and go smack each other in the mouth, we are taking the mental reps as much as we can. And we're working on the details that are going to make us successful when the live bullets start flying. So you like hearing that coming from both sides of the ball, honestly, but obviously the offense as well. So Dan Quinn continued into kind of that process. He said, quote, so think of it as crawl, walk, run. And so the crawl part is the classroom. Honestly, this is how you install the play. We like to jog through them at 50%. And then we go out here. I'm looking to see, is there a hesitation or are they attacking it with a full speed mentality? So if you follow that process over and over and over again, it takes reps. Obviously, you put in one coverage or one play one time and run it one time. Like by no means is that a play that you have. So it'll take reps over and over again so they can do them instinctively without having to overthink on it. And that's what I'm looking for. End quote. Everybody wants to run fast. That's what all of this is ultimately based on. And the better off you start off in the classroom, the better off your walkthroughs are, the better off even your jog-throughs are, the better off you're going to be when it's time to do it for real. Let's get to some specific comments about the actual offense and offensive coordinator, Kliff Kingsbury. Brian Robinson's a quote, I love Kliff. He has a great energy. I feel like he does a great job with trying to get to know his players and his personnel and just how to best utilize us. I feel like he's been doing a great job of that, and I appreciate him for that. End quote. Great to hear Brian Robinson feeling like his voice is heard, his opinions are heard, because at the end of the day, guys, we talk about Terry McLaurin having all these quarterbacks. How about all these offensive coordinators? Brian Robinson specifically, this is his third season in the NFL, his third offensive coordinator, his third different scheme, his third different language to learn, all that stuff. So having this third one, because you could see a guy getting really frustrated, but because he loves the energy, because he loves the conversations they're having, he continued that and said, quote, things in the meeting room, just how we meet and communicate from the meeting room to the walkthroughs to the field, just having that great communication, try to build a bond with our offense, just makes us all come together, end quote. And that's exactly what you want to hear. A lot of the issues that this team has had in the past has been tied to a lack of communication or unwillingness sometimes for offensive coordinators to take their players' input and really feel it. Sam Cosmi talked about after the first OTA practice, said, look, in the past, the guys who were on the field, the guys who were actually playing the snaps and going through the repetitions, our opinions weren't really taking all that seriously, weren't really taking to heart. These guys are obviously feeling like their voices are being heard right now. Veteran quarterback Marcus Mariota also stepped up to the mic and was asked about reuniting and moving with assistant head coach, offensive pass game coordinator Brian Johnson. Mariota said, quote, I can't say enough good words and good things about him, talking about Coach Johnson. He's also part of the reason why I came here. I think from a football mind standpoint, he's one of the better ones that I've been around. And I just think the person itself, he's a high integrity guy. And I just try to surround myself with those kinds of people. As you get older in this league, you've been around, you're just trying to surround yourself with good people. And I really think that's what they're building here. End quote. So again, you hear a veteran player talk about the value of understanding a guy, the value of connecting with somebody, the value of having their feelings heard, their desires heard, and feeling comfortable that this is a joint effort. This isn't a you do what I say and you do it the way I say it. No, like, how do you need things to be done? What suits you the best? What's going to make you most successful? Mariota on how he would describe Kliff Kingsbury's offense, quote, fun. I love it. I think, again, someone that's really incorporated what he loves to do, but also he tries to put each and every single one of us in the best position possible. So that may look different, right? It may look different for Jaden. It may look different for me. It may look different for Jeff or Sam. And also kind of depends on who's in there when there are skill guys. So when you're able to do that and be very versatile, especially as a play caller, I think that's really cool. And I think for us as players, it's a lot of confidence boosting, end quote. I've always said this when it comes to performance-based industries, you can tell when a team has solid training and solid coaching when everybody does different things, but within the same framework, right? And I think that's what Kliff Kingsbury is really kind of doing. He's kind of saying, this is who we're going to be as an offense. Like, here's our left and right limits as an offense. Everything in between, though, how we get to those left and right limits, that's where we color. That's where we get artistic. That's where we get creative. There's just a lot of nuances here. And the trick, of course, is balancing it all, right? And that's where Kliff Kingsbury has to come in, because that thing can get a little too cute and too far away from you as well. So some good things coming from the offense, but other offensive positions, the tight ends, the offensive line. We're going to talk a little bit about those two groups here coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're doing that today thanks to our friends over at Game Time. Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip off, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Game 3 of the Western Conference Finals is going down Sunday night. So if you want to catch Game 4 on Tuesday, you can for as little as $212. You can purchase NBA Finals Game 1 tickets in Boston for $722. If you're like me and you want the most bang for your buck, then the Section 13 NBA Finals Game 1 tickets may cost you $2,383 a piece. But thanks to Game Time, I know that they are the best value for my money. And I can get a preview of the action because Game Time shows me the view from my seat on top of it. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create your account, redeem your code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we started off talking about linebacker Jamin Davis and the versatility that his role may show this coming season. We ended up talking about offensive quotes from the OTA practice number 2 that was open to the media. We're going to wrap it up talking about two position groups, one that we haven't talked a lot about and one that we've talked quite a bit about, but not in this way. So we're going to add a little bit of a new wrinkle to it. We're going to start with the tight ends. And one of my insiders came through and kind of said, hey, haven't heard a lot about the tight ends, kind of wondering about them. And again, it's another position group that, there's a lot of blocking involved, and then some of the route running. You do get to see them do some of the route running, but it's a little bit of a different mix because a lot of their routes are more short. Some of them are intermediate, sure, but they kind of have to sift through the trash that is the defensive line, offensive line. So it's a little bit hard to see, right? But one thing that really stood out in the conversation, we talked about leadership again a lot on the last episode, but it's not just on the defensive side of the ball. There's also leadership being shown on the offensive side of the ball that is refreshing as much as it is needed, and it's coming from tight end Zach Ertz specifically. So Coach Quinn was asked on Wednesday of last week about leadership and about Zach Ertz specifically, and Quinn told us a story about asking rookie tight end Ben Sinnott if he had gotten the chance to meet up with Zach Ertz yet, and this was early on. I think this was rookie minicamp that he talked to him, and he said Zach Ertz actually reached out to him. You know what I mean? Before he ever even stepped foot in the building, the two had talked, and that's a veteran, right? That's a leader. That's a guy coming out there and saying, you're not just another teammate. You're not just a guy I'm going to work with. No, I'm going to be your leader. I'm going to reach out. And again, I don't want to harp on it, fully again, but that's action. That's Zach Ertz taking action. The answer is never do nothing. Leadership is an adjective, all those things. Zach Ertz took the action, picked up the phone, got the number, made the call or the text or whatever it was, established the relationship, and now I'm establishing myself as a leader for you in your young career, because if Ben Sinnott can carve out a career similar to Zach Ertz, Washington fans are going to be very, very happy. As far as performance is concerned, I got to be honest with you guys, Zach Ertz moves, catches, reacts. He looks good. He looks really good. He looks a lot better, honestly, than I expected him to look. I kind of expected to see kind of like a Logan Thomas's, where you could tell, dude's definitely fit and all that stuff. But you can see the age, you can see the mileage, you can see the wear and tear. Zach Ertz, honestly, guys, a lot of times I watch him make a catch or I watch him run a route or whatever it is, and I kind of have to remind myself, man, this dude is older, in the NFL. You know what I mean? So he's looked really good. I've been really happy with the way that he looks. His conditioning looks really good. All that stuff. Ben Sinnott, and the opportunities he's had has looked really good. John Bates, I think, is looking really fluid. I don't know if I would, sit here and say he's taking the next step as a receiver yet. I would like to see that, obviously. And then Cole Turner, the biggest question with him is blocking, right? And we haven't been able to see much of that outside of pad work. And pad work is not going to tell you if he's taking that step or not yet. So the reason we haven't talked a lot about tight ends, just not a lot to talk about just yet, but we should be hearing from some of these guys here pretty soon, as early as the next practice, stuff like that. So we probably get a little bit more from them as well. And then the offensive line. So we talked about the linemen, talk about these new guys, talk about the rookie, talk about the left tackle battle, right? But we haven't really talked about something that's very important. And I got to give a shout out to JP Finley, because one of my insiders pointed out to me that JP Finley mentioned, I don't know if it was on the radio or his podcast or anything like that, either. No matter where JP Finley is doing work, you should be listening to it. What's going to be really different about this year's offensive line group, not just the personnel, right? Obviously, Tyler Biadasz is new, Nick Allegretti, whoever the left tackle is going to be, all new, right? From the middle left, everybody's going to be new on the starting five. But what also is going to be new is the coaching, and not just the physical human, right? Like obviously Bobby Johnson is different than Travell Wharton, different than Juan Castillo, but the fact that you're just going to have a dude. And of course, this is knock on wood period, right? Travell Wharton had some health issues. Juan Castillo, was around for most of the season, but Bobby Johnson is your dedicated O-line coach, and he's there right now. Again, knock on wood, everything stays well with Bobby Johnson, obviously, but he should be there. Whereas last year, Juan Castillo was supposed to be a tight end coach, and he ends up basically coaching the offensive line. And then Coach Wharton comes back for a little bit, and then, it just kind of goes back and forth. And that lack of consistency is not good for, especially when you're talking about, again, like you want Terry McLaurin to understand how his route ties in with the other guys, right? But at the end of the day, like if Terry McLaurin goes out there, runs his route the way he's supposed to run it, Jahan Dotson goes out, runs his route the way he's supposed to run it, Luke McCaffrey does, De'Ami Brown does, we'll be fine. They don't actually have to know. Like, obviously it's better if they know, right? But like if Jahan Dotson runs his route exactly the way he's supposed to run it, and he goes, oh, I didn't know that me doing that opened up this guy's route behind me. As long as he runs his route, you're okay. On the offensive line, though, that doesn't work. Like as a right guard, you have to know why you're doing what you're doing. You need to know what's happening around you, because the defense can do anything at any given moment. You got to know how to react to it, right? And again, I don't want to get too hyperbolic here. Like receivers, it's definitely more important than I'm letting on. But the point is, it's more critical for offensive linemen to be working in unison, and it's hard to do that when you've got different coaches. It's hard to do that when you're working for a guy who's supposed to be coaching a different position group, all these kinds of things. So having a guy like Bobby Johnson come in with his history, with his experience, being committed there, something that's interesting to me that I don't want to get too deep into, but going off RAS scores, relative athletic scores. I know I said it twice, it's redundant, but going off of RAS, the Commanders have an average RAS, offensive line RAS of 7.17, which is 12th in the NFC, 26th in the National Football League. So not a very athletic offensive line group. The Dallas Cowboys had the fourth ranked NFC offensive line in RAS, 6th ranked in the NFL. That's a very different offensive line than Coach Quinn is used to working with. And I know this isn't the Dallas offense, right? But Kliff Kingsbury's offense is high flying, explosive. You got a quarterback that's probably going to roll a lot, probably going to move a lot. I'm really interested to see how this offensive line's athleticism or lack thereof can keep up or catch up with the quarterback and with this offense. So to me, that's something, again, I don't want to dive too deep into it right now, but it's kind of a storyline I want to watch. Because again, having that coach, Bobby Johnson, there should make that process a little bit smoother. But I do think that is an important point that JP made, again, whether it was on the radio or on his show. So again, I want to point that out. A lot of people are talking about the impact these coaches can have, not just the players, but the coaches, the new coaching staff. I think just the simple consistency of O-line coaching this year compared to last year specifically should also do some good things as well. So a little offensive conversation here today, but for the most part, started again with Jamin Davis, but we got offensive heavy here. We'll come back tomorrow. We'll talk about some more things, maybe dive into some of the things we talked about today a little bit deeper, but also talk about the Washington Commanders and Washington, D.C. trying to host the NFL draft sooner rather than later. That and more coming up on tomorrow's episode. In the meantime, if you've got questions or comments, just throw them in the YouTube comment section or text me directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to do that. Don't forget to check out Locked On Sports Today, your first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or your first view today and every day. Every day, thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.